In the 90s, it began to take off. They called it the Internet. The Internet. Not an Internet. There became only one. And it worked. Early users sometimes found it complicated. They worried about security of inputting their credit card information, who they might meet online, and whether their digital media files would download quickly enough. But there were some who understood where it was all going. They saw the future, and they turned out to be right. Then, in 2008, a new big idea was presented to the world. A way to fuse information with value, to create a peer-to-peer electronic cash that could be efficiently used across all internet activity and more. The vision requires a global ledger, a distributed timestamp server, recording payment and data transactions in chronological order on a single blockchain. One ledger for the world. A ledger for value. A ledger for identity. A ledger for business. A ledger for honesty. Bitcoin SV, fulfilling the Satoshi vision for one world blockchain and one digital currency. One to reinvent the internet. Bitcoin SV. One world, one chain. Welcome to CoinGeek Live.
Welcome to CoinGeek Live. I'm your host, Jimmy Nguyen, founding president of Bitcoin Association, the global industry organization that advances the business of Bitcoin SV. Bitcoin SV is the only Bitcoin project and network that fulfills the original design, vision, and protocol of its creator, Satoshi Nakamoto. We are here at CoinGeek to celebrate all the advancements that have happened in the Bitcoin SV ecosystem and learn about more. We invite so many speakers today, as well as attendees from across the globe to participate and learn more about this vision, including many speakers and many of you attendees out there who work on other blockchain or digital currency projects, because we want to engage in a dialogue with the entire technology industry about the future of blockchain. We hope you learn more and learn to share our vision for why Bitcoin SV will be the one chain that can lead the world, because that's what we here at CoinGeek events really love to believe in. Over the next few days, we're going to hear from speakers across the globe who both share that vision and are learning that vision. As we kick off this conference, I want to take some time today to explain to you why we believe in the power of one. The entire blockchain industry that we have out there actually birthed from just one white paper. This, the famed Satoshi Nakamoto white paper that introduced Bitcoin in 2008 to the world as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It really reinvented our thinking about how internet payments could be done by reducing intermediaries and by increasing direct connection between people, persons, peers. And it also laid out the foundation for a new digital ledger technology for the future. However, Satoshi Nakamoto did not foresee a world of many competing blockchain projects and digital currencies. In fact, he saw only one. He even wrote it out loud. There's only one global chain, in this email in April of 2009 to Mike Hearn. This is a profound and critical statement. There's only one global chain. Because as we'll learn, one blockchain means more efficiency, more interoperability, more access to real-time data, and the truth of transaction history. So that was the vision Satoshi laid out at the very beginning of Bitcoin's life. Here we are almost over a decade later, and that's not the truth we live in. Instead, we live in a world with over 5,000 different cryptocurrencies and probably 100 different blockchain and distributed ledger projects. How did we get here? We got here because people simply did not believe in Bitcoin and the Satoshi vision. They thought that Bitcoin should only be an asset for storing value, a digital gold, something you use to store larger amounts of value and only transact in periodically. They restricted and crippled the scale of the Bitcoin network, and that's what led to the belief that Bitcoin could only be one thing. But we believe in a much bigger vision for Bitcoin. And over the next 3 days, I'm asking all of you out there to open your mind to this much bigger vision for Bitcoin, to be not just a digital currency, but a data network, a protocol that can create the next major technology leap of our lifetime since the internet. And just like we operate on a single global internet, we believe the world should operate on one leading global blockchain. And it's only Bitcoin SV that has the power to achieve that. I want to begin our journey by taking 3 steps to educate you about the Satoshi vision for one global chain, especially for those of you who are new to the Bitcoin SV ecosystem. In addition, how scaling is necessary to achieve this vision for Bitcoin. And finally, what are the advantages for all businesses and consumers across the world? Let's begin by talking about, frankly, the important question. What is Bitcoin? It's such a simple question to some people. They think it's a new form of money, but it's so much more. Bitcoin is the fusion of data and money. And that is right there in the word itself, bit for data and coin for money. It created a system in which value could be transferred across a data network that's represented in the Bitcoin native token, but also can store and allow us to engage with data and have that data ascribed monetary value. You can do so much with this concept because data is the new commodity of our digital economy. It's the new most important commodity going forward into the future. With the Bitcoin network and Satoshi's design, we have a distributed ledger that can record payment transactions so that no one person or company is in charge of the ledger and therefore can cheat the ledger. We can all see it. It's shared and updated through a common system, and it can record payment transactions. But those payment transactions are just data, and it can do so much more. It can be the world ledger that combines data and money value. And once you understand that, you can see what you can do with the Bitcoin blockchain that combines data and money. You can write data, record data to the chain. You can read or access data from it. You can own, as a consumer, your own data, whether it be from social media applications like Facebook, your consumer health data, your consumer shopping practices. There's a way to own and also then monetize the data. And perhaps most importantly, for advanced business applications, you can compute with the data that is on-chain as well as data that's accessed from off of the chain. This opens the door to so many business and practical consumer functions: sending monetary value, transmitting and accessing data from the chain, powering smart contracts, tokenizing assets from the real world, managing all of our digital devices, powering big data, and leading to a new world of computation associated with the Bitcoin blockchain. There's so much more, even beyond that, that we can't even imagine, and bright entrepreneurs are going to develop. And it starts because Bitcoin is more than just a digital currency, and even its blockchain itself. It's also a network protocol. Just like Internet Protocol, it's the foundational rule set for an entire data network. It also provides the basis to allow people to build further systems or further protocols within or upon its rule set. For example, in the internet world, just as HTTP is a further protocol built upon TCP/IP, and it's used to transmit HTML code across the World Wide Web. Bitcoin is the major new data protocol of our lifetime since the internet. And more importantly, Satoshi Nakamoto described it as a distributed timestamp server. This is a concept that does not get enough attention, but we'll discuss during a dialogue I have with Dr. Craig Wright during tomorrow's sessions at this conference. Satoshi described a system where you could timestamp transactions or business events in history across chronological order. Instead of one person or company keeping that timestamp server, it's distributed to prevent cheating. By having a distributed timestamp server, we get a chronological history of events. And that makes the Bitcoin blockchain an auditable, verifiable, and transparent distributed timestamp server, because the ledger is public. That doesn't mean all the data on the network is publicly accessible. It can be encrypted or obfuscated to protect privacy. But the ability to check that certain transactions or events in business and history happened at a particular moment in time is time-stamped into an ongoing chronology, an ongoing ledger. And that provides immense business power. In fact, it opens the door to what we believe are the key aspects of a true blockchain, that it's public, a public global distribution of data. It's transparent and audible so that people can access and trust the chronology of events that happen on it. It's immutable, difficult, if not impossible, to change and tamper with. Fast and low cost, so you can have huge volumes of payments and other types of business and data events recorded to this chain. And it has privacy, yet with traceability to deter bad behavior. The true blockchain can deliver this and Satoshi's other big theme in the white paper, honesty. The word honest is used 15 times in the white paper because Satoshi wanted to create an honest system. And by having this big, open, public ledger with the chronological, time-stamped history of events, we can create a society where business activities, our consumer engagements are more honest because they can be proven to be right or wrong, traced across history. And that is why the Bitcoin SV node, and now known as infrastructure team, restored most of the original Bitcoin protocol. It always had these capabilities, as well as technical functions that could do more advanced features. But they were restricted, limited across the journey of Bitcoin's life on the BTC network. So in February of this year, our technical team restored most of that protocol in what was called the Genesis upgrade to unleash the power of the Dragon, the Bitcoin SV node symbol, into now Bitcoin SV as the protocol data network for the future. We are going to continue that journey by now explaining to you why it's important that Bitcoin needs to scale. If you've got this great protocol with all of these technical powers, how does it become the one chain for the world? The answer is simple. You got to scale, and you've got to scale big. In fact, Satoshi Nakamoto said this himself in that very same email to Mike Hearn, in which he said there's only one global chain. Way back in 2009, Satoshi said that the existing Visa credit card network processes about 15 million internet purchases per day worldwide. Bitcoin can already scale much larger than that with existing hardware for a fraction of the cost. It never really hits a scale ceiling. Satoshi knew back in 2009, Bitcoin was never meant to hit a scale ceiling. It was meant to scale big, to be the one global chain. But that's not what happened, because the BTC network chose, for various reasons, to restrict its block size to a small amount, 1 or 2 megabytes, and thus its transaction capacity to about 7 transactions a second, nowhere near the levels of the Visa network, which does 2 to 56,000 transactions a second. It would be like creating the early days of the internet and email and saying, you know what, we want to limit the number of emails that can be sent per second or per minute to 7 seconds or 7 emails per second across the entire world. If that had happened, email would never have grown into the very powerful usage it has for life in consumer and business worlds today. Bitcoin SV's vision is very simple: unbounded scaling, because that's what Satoshi's vision always contemplated. It means that there is no preset limit on the scaling capacity of the Bitcoin network and BSV. Instead, it's up to market forces to let the volume of transactions, the block size, the throughput capacity grow as much as is necessary to sustain what is needed on the network. It means we can also avoid the problems hitting the Ethereum network since well over a year ago, in which the blockchain was reported to be almost full. They needed to launch Ethereum 2.0. And because of the DeFi craze that's happening now and a lot of buying volume, Ethereum gas and transaction fees are hitting a record high. That is not a good thing. Over the past few months, I've seen Ethereum gas fees hit $14, for example, per transaction. You cannot have a business network with tokens and smart contracts executing at scale for any meaningful business if it costs that much to send a transaction. Well, what is Bitcoin SV's path? Here's a chart that helps explain where we are in the growth of our network. Currently, Bitcoin SV is comfortably doing over 2,800 transactions per second on our main network, well above BTC, Bitcoin Cash, Ripple, even Hyperledger. Nowhere near as it takes to rival the Visa network. But by next year, our technical team thinks that with continued technical upgrades and improvements and performance, we will hit 50,000 transactions per second on our main net and continue to grow from there. In fact, our scaling test network, in which we're testing some of these improvements, has been mining blocks that contain individually anywhere from 2.7 to 6 million and even 13 million transactions per block, creating theoretical throughput of 64 to 6,500 transactions per second. And we want to go massive. The nChain team is working on what's called Terranode, an enterprise-class version of the Bitcoin software designed to sustain in the future terabyte-sized blocks. That's 1 million megabytes, where we think you can do 4.2 million plus transactions per second. And that means a data network that can power not just payments, but all forms of data for the entire world. It also means we can do it for very, very low fees. No Ethereum high gas fees. Currently on the Bitcoin SV network, just this past weekend I checked, our median transaction fee on the network was well less than 1/100th of a US cent. And over time, we think that number's too high. It needs to get smaller and smaller, and it will. And that means we opened a world of micro payments and microtransactions, where you're sending across the internet and digital devices, not $100 or $50, but 1 cent. Half a cent, 5 cents, a quarter cent. And that means all forms of our online activity and data can be monetized. Imagine a world, for example, where you actually pay to run an internet search, but the search results you get are better because there's no sponsored ads or sponsored links to go through. Imagine a world where your consumer data is owned by you on the blockchain and someone can pay you 5 cents, 2 cents to access it if you so authorize. Over the next 3 days, you'll see so many use cases for this emerging across Bitcoin SV. On the screen, you'll see some of those example areas: healthcare data, clinical research data, supply chain management, esports and online games, casino and iGaming tech, social media, entertainment and media content, identity management, big data feeds, IoT, digital advertising, the AR, VR, and experiential reality space, financial services, and even RegTech, regulatory technology. The possibilities are limitless for what you can do with micropayments and microtransactions. And that leads us to finally exploring what are some of the advantages for businesses as well as consumers to having one global chain, just one. Well, first of all, we don't have to live in a world with 5,000 different cryptocurrencies. We can have one dominant digital currency, as well as one platform to tokenize other assets. It doesn't mean companies or central banks, governments across the world cannot have their own coins and assets, but it means there can be one base ledger that powers them all, creating greater efficiency, avoiding the issues of interoperability, and providing consistency, just like we have one global internet. We can also break down data silos. You'll hear about this a lot over the next few days. It is a powerful, powerful impact of one global chain, especially if it's public. In too many of our industry sectors, we have data that's kept separate. The US healthcare industry sees this, where my doctor's data for me is different than my dentist, different from a specialist surgeon, it's different from the pharmacy where I get my prescriptions filled. In supply chain management and logistics, across the travel of product across a supply chain, data is kept in different places by different organizations. It makes it hard to access real-time information, which we need to make better business or even healthcare decisions by your medical providers when they're prescribing you drugs or other treatment. Having real-time access to all available data across the value chain of an industry brings not just greater efficiency, but much more powerful decision-making for us as consumers and businesses. And that's also especially important because we can get that data in real time. No waiting to syncing, making sure you have data from the correct databases across the world or across steps in the industry value chain. Real-time access means real-time better decision-making from a public chain where the data still can be protected in terms of its privacy with encryption and obfuscation tactics for the data, but it provides the ability for anyone across the world to access the transaction history in real time. That leads to improving product and asset traceability, whether it be physical goods we ship, intangible assets, our very rights that can be tracked on a chain, such as intellectual property rights, voting rights. It improves the traceability in a way that brings more honesty, more efficiency, and more transparency to the world. It's also great for satisfying auditors and governments. A lot of people in the digital currency world don't like to engage with the governments of the world. They want it to be anti-government. Bitcoin SV's ecosystem is absolutely the opposite. We believe to achieve global adoption, this technology needs to integrate and win the confidence of government agencies across the world. And wouldn't it be easier if transactions are recorded on a publicly accessible chain that auditors could be tracking on a daily, monthly, quarterly basis as opposed to doing it at the end of the year? Wouldn't it be easier for companies to report to their government agencies that regulate them, such as in the gaming industry, reporting to a gaming commission, their revenue and transaction history that could be trusted from a public chain rather than having questions from regulators about whether the data is accurate? This is a powerful use case for blockchain technology, and it leads to this final one, which we'll hear so much about over the next few days, reinventing the internet. That's what Satoshi envisioned. Go back and read that white paper. It talks about transforming and making more efficient the ability to send payments on the internet. You'll hear from companies that want to change how social media performs, how consumer reviews perform, how digital advertising performs, because consumers can own their own data on the blockchain and can monetize it with small amounts of micropayments and change all online and digital activity as we know it. It's such a powerful vision, and I hope that you'll see it changes the world where everything can be online to a world where everything can also, if you want it to be on-chain, with two layers interacting, data on the blockchain monetized with the online internet and the activities and applications we enjoy and love every day, working together to be better with one. If you like this vision, I ask you to join us. Visit the Bitcoin Association website at bitcoinassociation.net. And you can apply to become a member or affiliate of our organization. We have members across the globe, across the ecosystem set of participants, miners, exchanges, wallets, enterprises, startup developers, as well as many other service providers. It's a big group because it will take all of us to help fulfill this Satoshi vision. We're also doing it from our new headquarters in Zug, Switzerland. The crypto valley of the world, as they like to call it. Switzerland is a global capital for finance, business, technology, and now digital currency. And from this one headquarters, we are reaching out with teams across the world to advance the business of Bitcoin SV and the vision of Satoshi Nakamoto. I hope you see this bigger vision. It's so big. It's a vision for one. A vision for one world that is more connected. A vision for one data network that breaks down walls and builds bridges. A vision for one Bitcoin that unites the far reaches of our globe. A vision for one system that helps us reach out to people, peer to peer, connecting us across a universe of constant digital interactions. Bitcoin was introduced as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system to reinvent how internet payments are done by using a distributed record of transactions. Transactions organized into blocks, connected over time. But those blocks can contain more than just payments. They can contain the one most powerful commodity of our digital world, data. Therein lies Bitcoin's bigger vision, the fusion of data and money to connect everything in one digital currency that transcends geographic boundaries, one protocol for a data network that powers enterprise applications, one universal source of truth that breaks down data silos and opens data transparency, one ledger that traces products, assets, our rights, and the very sustainability of our planet. Many names: distributed timestamp server, time chain, blockchain. But no matter what you call it, it is more effective, more powerful, and more connected if, in the words of Satoshi Nakamoto himself, there is only one global chain. One chain connecting everything, everyone. Whether you're from Vietnam, China, Australia, South Africa, Argentina, London, or here, New York City. Bitcoin SV. One world, one chain. We are indeed one world, living through unprecedented times. And that's why we could not gather you all here in person in New York for CoinGeek New York as we had originally hoped. But instead, we've pivoted to this virtual conference for the next 3 days. I want to thank our amazing event team and the production teams here in New York City, as well as in a second broadcast site that we're syncing to live in London. We'll be bringing you speakers from our site here in New York, London, and remotely from across the world. And it is really reflective of our times that we are connecting the world in this way, as we also hope to connect the world with one blockchain. The vision I just laid out is very grand. We know that. It will take a lot of technical achievement to get there. Helping lead the way in that technical achievement is the technical director of the Bitcoin SV node, and now known as Bitcoin SV infrastructure team. He's also the chief technology officer of nChain, a leading global blockchain research, development, and advisory business with a research facility and development arm based in London. He is a key voice and figure in what makes Bitcoin SV work. He'll be here today to talk about releases that just happened today to the ecosystem, and the peer-to-peer vision of Bitcoin that Satoshi laid out, and how that is necessary to achieve this big scale. Please welcome to the London stage my colleague, my partner in the Bitcoin vision, and my friend, Steve Shatters.
Thank you, Jimmy. Today I would like to reveal to you some of the key missing pieces, in fact, what I believe might be the last missing pieces to truly realize the peer-to-peer vision that was laid out by Satoshi Nakamoto in his 2008 white paper. It's very difficult to talk about Bitcoin without using the word peer. It's right there in the title of the white paper. But what is a peer? This is a word that I think has been used and occasionally misused in the history of Bitcoin. It's often used to refer to a node. But the Bitcoin network, in fact, has more than one type of peer. And the definition of a peer is, or a peer group rather, is a group of people that share some kind of commonality in either status or capability. And in fact, Bitcoin has more than one type of peer. Let me read you a piece of the white paper, a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash. It's fairly clear. It's the third word of the white paper. Would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another. Here in the second phrase of the first sentence of the white paper, Satoshi Nakamoto is describing the most important type of peer in the Bitcoin network without going through a financial institution. The alternative to a financial institution in the Bitcoin world is, of course, the miners, the nodes. And these are the types of peers that people most frequently are referring to when they use the word peer. But let's jump back to this middle one, because what this is actually describing is the users of the Bitcoin network, not the miners, arguably the most important kind of peer in all of Bitcoin. Because without users, what is the purpose of Bitcoin? Why do we need miners? Why do we need Bitcoin at all? Satoshi clearly understood this, because in the very first edition, the very first version of the Bitcoin software that was released, it contained a feature which these days we call IP-to-IP transactions. Back then, it was often referred to as IP transactions. And it was simply a mechanism that allowed one user to connect to another and exchange transactions between them in a peer-to-peer fashion. It embodied the way that users are supposed to deal with the Bitcoin network, but it was incomplete at the time. Bitcoin is supposed to scale, and one of the primary principles of scale, it's so simple that it almost doesn't need stating, is don't do work that you don't need to do. And of course, when users have to listen to everything that's happening on the Bitcoin network, when they have to listen to details of transactions that are happening on the other side of the planet that don't concern them at all, that's one of the first barriers to scaling. And it was never part of the original Bitcoin design. The first version of Bitcoin, of course, incorporated a wallet. It incorporated all of the logic required for mining, but it was intended as an alpha version. It was a proof of concept. It also included IP transactions. And I firmly believe that Satoshi intended the client side and the mining side of Bitcoin software to diverge fairly quickly. So we didn't quite get there at the time because of some technical limitations and because of the fact that the IP transactions implementation itself was a prototype. It was a proof of concept. It was something that Satoshi put there to show people how it could be done. But alas, no one noticed for 10 long years. And so let's walk through some of the problems that need to be solved so that, that peers on the network, users of the network, can actually interact in the way that Satoshi described originally. You've got to solve a bunch of problems. First, you've got to find your transaction party out there on the internet. There's billions of IP addresses. You can't just guess. You've got to have some kind of way. Now, in the early days, Satoshi proposed a solution to this, which was good enough to get them over the line for testing. It was find your IP address and post it in a forum, the Bitcoin Talk forum, more specifically. Now, that worked, but of course, it's not very user-friendly. If we want 7 billion people on the planet to be using Bitcoin, we've got to do better than that. There's a lot of people that probably don't even know how to find their IP address. And of course, going and posting it on a forum isn't exactly a user-friendly or scalable experience. And then there's the problem of how to connect. This is a common problem. It's not Bitcoin specific at all. But the way that the internet is fundamentally designed is in this kind of a request-response manner. When you as a user want to make use of the internet or a website, etc., you make requests outbound. And Bitcoin, typical internet routers, the type that you have at home that connect you to your ADSL or your fiber connection, etc., mostly have firewalls that allow connections to go outwards, but they don't allow them to come inwards. And that works fine in the web model because that's just how you use the web. You request resources. But when you want to talk peer-to-peer, this presents a problem. And like I said, it's a well-known problem. There are many applications on the internet that have to find ways around this. So it doesn't matter which direction you're trying to go. There are ways around this, including network address translation. None of them are particularly simple, though. And none of them are well adopted. Then, of course, there's a problem of how much your transaction is going to cost. This problem remains unsolved for BTC today. You have to guess. You can't even ask a miner. But even if you could, the answer they gave you may not actually be accurate. They themselves don't know. Because at the moment you send a Bitcoin transaction isn't the moment when a miner actually makes the final decision about whether to include it in a block on BTC. The price that you pay or the price that is required may well change between now and when the block is mined. So we've got that question, and then of course there needs to be an interaction between the two parties who want to transact with each other. This comes down to the communication problem, but also how to structure those communications. So how does a merchant tell a customer how much they need to pay? Then there is the problem of how we'll get our transaction confirmed. On the Bitcoin network, traditionally the way we've done it is spit it out onto the peer-to-peer network, and then some magic happens, but we don't really have any visibility of that. We can't see if something has gone wrong because there's no feedback loop between the users and the miners. And of course, the most critical part of the peer-to-peer vision was the simplified payment verification technique that was described in Section 8 of the Bitcoin white paper. It requires a thing called an SPV proof, which is a thing that the miner has to give back to the user once the transaction has been mined into a block. But there's never been a mechanism to do that, and certainly not a reliable one. And then, of course, comes a further problem. When we send the transaction, of course, by definition, we have to be online, but the Merkle proof, the SPV proof, doesn't come back to us until much later, and there's no guarantee that we are still online. So how do we get these messages? Peer-to-peer transactions are the missing piece of the configuration, I suppose, of the Bitcoin network. And we've solved some of these problems, but not all of them. But collectively together, the set of tools that you actually see on the screen right now, Paymail Miner ID, Bitcoin-D, BIP270, MAPI, and a new thing called SPV channels, can solve all of these problems for us and provide a complete end-to-end solution to implementing the peer-to-peer interaction that the white paper describes. So put them all together and you have peer-to-peer. So I would like to announce the release of 3 new products today. 2 of them are updates to ones that you're probably very well familiar with. And one of them, of course, is brand new, SPV channels. So these are all beta. We wanted to get them out because we want developers to be able to start playing with them, start experimenting and start attempting to implement this end-to-end interaction. So Bitcoin SV 1.06 Push Edition contains new functions to provide and verify Merkle proofs. The Bitcoin software hasn't been able to do this until now. It now provides 0MQ notifications when double spends are detected. And the part that is still work in progress, which will be in the final 1.06 release, is a new peer-to-peer message that allows miners who detect a double spend to broadcast the fact that that double spend exists across the network in a provable way. This is very important because the way Bitcoin works right now, the way the software works, is when a double spend is detected, the node that detects it simply suppresses it, drops it, ignores it, it doesn't tell anybody. And that may be okay in some cases, but if a merchant is looking for confidence that a transaction submitted to the Bitcoin network will either be confirmed or that they'll know that it's not going to be confirmed quickly, then we need these double spend attempts to be broadcast and well known to the entire network. The merchant API leverages the new SPV, the Merkle proof capabilities, and adds to it by moving from a request response model to a model that many JavaScript developers will be familiar with, an event notification model. So when you submit transactions to the merchant API, you can register for callbacks on events relating to that transaction. And the 2 that we have implemented now would be double spends or when the transaction is mined into a block. But other events could easily be, we could easily extend this to include other events, such as when the outputs of a transaction get spent. And finally, SPV channels. This is an end-to-end encrypted messaging service with a push capability that provides an always-on point of presence for a Bitcoin user and provides a single unified interface for handling the receipt of messages, whether you're online and offline. And what it does is it provides you the best user experience that is possible, taking into account your online-offline status. SPV channels is not a very Bitcoin-y thing. It solves a problem that's actually a problem that is encountered outside of the Bitcoin world quite commonly. But think of it as something like an email server, an IMAP server. It's intended to be a hosted service, which means someone has to pay for it. And in fact, it may well become the first example of a nano service taking advantage of the nano payments capability that was put into Bitcoin SV 1.05. Because it's intended to be a hosted service, of course, end-to-end encryption by default had to be a part of the picture. In addition to this, today we're releasing a new version of the Bitcoin SV.io website to reflect the fact that it is no longer just a home for the Bitcoin SV node software. It is a home for a suite of products which we classify, I suppose, under the banner of Bitcoin SV infrastructure. So go take a look at the site. It's got links and information about all of the 6 services that I just described. So how does all this work together? Well, we walked through the process just before and we discovered the problems. So let's go through it again and talk about what the solutions are. The first one, how do I locate my transacting party? Well, this is what Paymail was originally designed for. It's intended as a service discovery mechanism. We've only implemented one way of using it so far, but there are many others planned and in the pipeline. And it replaced the need for users to swap Bitcoin addresses in order to be able to pay each other. replaced it with a more generic and much more flexible model of simply passing output scripts, which means any complex script is now easy to pay to. And of course, SPV channels comes into the picture here because the service discovery mechanism for an SPV channel, or one of, the way that we've done it, is Paymail. If you know an SPV user, a Paymail user's Paymail address, then you can find out where you can contact them with an SPV channel. So a quick demonstration of how it works. It really is quite simple. You can see down the bottom, we have the channel server that belongs to the character here on the right, the blue guy. And over on the left, let's call her Alice, she has her channel server at the top. So both of them, note, are going to make outbound connections to the channel servers. So they get past their ISP routers, their firewalls, simply by both making outbound connections and making use of an intermediary. Messages are either stored or forwarded, and it simply depends on whether the recipient is online or not. And channel server knows whether there's an active connection, in which case it will send a push notification immediately to the user to receive their message. And reply goes via the recipient's channel server again, the address of which is either contained in the original message or can be resolved using Paymail. So very similar model to the way that, that email works. With an IMAP server, it's also got that same push capability. So how does it work beyond the prototype? So here again, we've got a slightly more detailed version of it, which actually includes the routers, and you can see the flow of a message that goes all the way around in a circle. But what does it look like to a user? This is the important part. Once you abstract away all of the technical components that are underneath, you get to the image, or you get to the user experience. And we're not the only ones that have ever had to deal with this problem and solve this problem. Skype, Zoom, TeamViewer, these are all things that require direct connections between two machines that are probably behind firewalls. And the solution is largely the same. Whether their end-to-end encryption is, the degree of end-to-end encryption, I suppose, is a variable, but we've baked that in from day one. So this is what it looks like from an end user's perspective. It's a virtual channel. From their point of view, if both users are online, messages pass straight through. It's almost like they have a direct connection to each other, with the added advantage that if you're sending a one-shot message to someone, you don't need to care whether they're online or not. So now that we've solved that problem, how much will it cost? Who's going to mine my transaction in the first place? Well, we've got Miner ID for that. Miners can use Miner ID not only to take ownership of their own mining history, but also as a service advertising mechanism. So we query Miner ID, we find out, we want to know what fee is required for a particular miner, we find the address of their merchant API. We can send a request to a merchant API to find out what their fee, to ask for a fee quote. So now I, as a merchant, know exactly what is required from this transaction. I may also want to, I now want to create a transaction specification for the end user, so the user knows exactly what they have to do to create the transaction in order to complete the purchase. And so we have BIP 270, or possible future variants of BIP 270, which describes how that transaction specification is structured. And it may include more things than just what transaction fee you need to include and how much you need to pay. It may also include a request to include nano payments for other services that are required as part of the transaction. I may be subscribing, and in this case I am subscribing for an event notification on the transaction to say, can you tell me if it's double spent, or can you tell me if when it's mined and give me a Merkle proof? We could piggyback off this existing transaction to pay for those nano services. So, and now how do we submit the transaction? Well, the user, the customer, sends the transaction to the merchant, who's the one that cares about getting it confirmed, and the merchant takes responsibility for getting it to the miners. Because we have miner discovery and merchant APIs, they can contact them directly. They can get a response from the miner immediately as to the status of the transaction. How do we get a security proof? The SPV proof, the Merkle proof, lots of different names for the same block gets mined. Bitcoin D will notify Merchant API of it. Merchant API can now go and request all of these Merkle proofs that it's been asked for, and using an SPV channel, the address of which was given when the transaction was first submitted to the miner, they can send back the Merkle proof, and the user now knows everything is okay. Optionally, Merchant can also send a copy of it back to the user, because they will probably care, because they've got change addresses being spent. So they may be receiving change as part of that transaction. And so in the offline use case, the user has gone offline or the merchant has gone offline. This is just a quick demonstration of what happens. The messages just queue up. There's no magic here. It's just an implementation of a solution to a well-known problem. User comes online, of course, and it's just like downloading all your email. So, I'm going to pray for the demo gods to be kind to me today. We have built a demonstration of all of this, and behind this we've got a Bitcoin node and a Regtest stack, a Merchant API, and an SPV channel server. And what we have here at the front end is a basic wallet for a customer and a merchant. And to begin with, the merchant is actually connected to their SPV channel. They're requesting push messages. So let's just send a message into that channel. And you can see what's happened here. They've grabbed it. They've received it immediately. Let's disconnect the merchant now. To simulate him going into the subway or somewhere where he's got no signal. Send the message, nothing's come through. As soon as the merchant comes back online, bingo, we have our message. So you can see that the use cases for an SPV channel go well beyond Bitcoin. I imagine people will come up with all sorts of interesting ways to make use of it. But let's just look how it works in Bitcoin. And first we'll start with the simple case. The most likely case where everything goes well. Customer pays the merchant because they've already received the transaction spec, and you can see we've sent it to the merchant. Merchant receives it. They do what they need to do next, which is submit it to the Merchant API. And in this case, the Merchant API responds with success. Well, that's great. We know that this transaction is going to be accepted by this miner. If we contact every miner, then we can probably get pretty close to perfect assurance that it's going to get mined. So some time goes by, and eventually a block gets mined. And then what happens? The Bitcoin node contacts the Merchant API to say a block has been mined, and the Merchant API retrieves the Merkle proofs and sends them out to the various users. In this particular case, I've done a couple of transactions before, and we've got a slight bug because we're repeating them twice. But here you can see this is the Merkle proof data structure itself, and it's been received by the miner because they happen to be online. So let's just try another scenario, a double spend. This is an accidental double spend, and you've always been able to detect it when it happens this way around. We've actually created the double spend and sent it out first. And now, whether by accident or by intention, we try to spend the same coin a second time. So what happens? Well, we send it to the merchant, and the merchant submits it to MAPI, which immediately tells us that we can't spend this transaction because we're missing inputs, which is another way of saying it's double spent. So that part isn't really new. What's new here is another double spend scenario that we haven't actually been able to deal with in the past with previous incarnations of the software. So here we've just sent the transaction and everything has gone smoothly. That's fine. And then we walk out of the shop and we send the double spend transaction. What would normally happen is this transaction would go hit one node on the network, which would recognize it as a double spend and then drop it, and no one would ever hear about it. But we need to do better than that. In this particular case, the node actually hears about it. It tells the other nodes that it knows that it's connected to that there is a double spend. And when it reaches the node that actually has the event notification registered for the double spent transaction, it will immediately use SPV channels to notify the merchant that a double spend has happened. And this is almost as good as stopping it from happening at all in the first place, because the merchant can take action. They can say, okay, well, this transaction you've given me, this banknote you've given me is counterfeit. I'm not going to accept it. And so is this transaction. So the demo gods have been relatively kind to me today, and let us get through most of this without crashing. And a big thank you to the nChain team who worked very hard to actually put this together in a very, very short time frame. I hope what we've demonstrated here today will serve to help people start to implement the Satoshi vision, the peer-to-peer client-side part of Bitcoin, which is so important and has been so neglected for the last 11 years. This is not the only way to solve these problems. It's one way, but it is a complete end-to-end solution to the Bitcoin user experience. Thank you.
And welcome back to CoinGeek Live. I hope you enjoyed and learned a lot from that technical presentation from Steve Shatters. The work he and the Bitcoin SV infrastructure team do helps benefit the entire ecosystem and all of the wonderful applications and ventures building on top of this one future global blockchain. Now I am going to give you a few housekeeping notes to help you enjoy your experience in this virtual conference. Because we are a virtual conference, I hope you're navigating around the virtual conference platform. And the more you interact in the platform, you can gain points, as you'll see, to help yourself potentially win up to $1,000 in Bitcoin SV if you top the leaderboard. And we'll see who's climbing up the leaderboard over the next few days. In addition, for those of you who are watching through the virtual conference platform, you can submit questions during the presentations, and we'll try our best to select some of the most popular questions and get them answered live from some of the speakers and panelists if there's time permitting. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. He is going to be appearing remotely because unfortunately he could not make it up to our New York studio, but this is a presentation and a company I've been waiting for quite some time to unveil to the Bitcoin SV ecosystem and the broader world. They're going to be telling us about how Bitcoin, in particular the Bitcoin SV blockchain, can bring greater power to augmented, virtual, and experiential reality. Please welcome the founder and CEO of a company called Transmira, who will talk about their platform Omniscape and how you too can participate in some of it throughout the conference. Welcome to the virtual stage, Robert Rice.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Jimmy. It was an awesome introduction. I'm super excited to be here. We've got some pretty amazing technology and things to talk about today, and it's going to be great. So again, my name is Robert Rice. I'm the CEO and founder of Transmira, and we're developing a platform called Omniscape. Now, if we could go to the first slide, we'll kick this off and talk about how we're going to change the world. The next one, please. Okay, so I kind of wanted to start off with a really strong statement here. Bitcoin SV is a fundamental cornerstone of the tech ecosystem necessary to build the XR metaverse. There's a few key pieces here. The word fundamental, I think, is very strong, as is cornerstone. As I go through my presentation, I'll talk about what XR is, what the metaverse is, and how and why Bitcoin SV is necessary for that. And then, of course, I'm going to, branch over to what we're developing, Omniscape, and use that as a use case and kind of show how all the pieces fit together and how this is really going to be kind of a game-changing and disruptive thing. So great, let's get started. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, what is XR? I'm sure everybody has heard of virtual reality and augmented reality before. They're very distinct, but they're also related. AR, or augmented reality, is really all about where you are. It's the place around you, and how do we take digital content and information and present it in a unique and interactive, holographic sort of way for you to interact with. Whereas virtual reality, or VR, is really more about you going somewhere else, whether it's a game or a fantasy world or something like Second Life. It's you being fully immersed in some other environment that's somewhere else. XR is something a little bit different here. It's kind of the seamless blend between the two. And this is something that's kind of a radical departure from where a lot of people in the industry are, where they look at AR and VR as part of a spectrum, whereas we view XR as more of the two of them combined and blended over each other. And this is important for a few reasons, which I'll get into in just a second. So the metaverse is pretty much all of the things everywhere, whether it's a multiverse of virtual worlds connected, or every bit of data and data overlay and thing that you might see around the world, in the environments around you. It's kind of everything. It's this big catch-all sort of version. So in our case, when we think about what does the metaverse mean and how do we build it, what are the use cases for it? Because I think, at the end of the day, you have to understand what those use cases are, and then, kind of work backwards and deconstruct to really lay out how you get there, how your technology roadmap needs to be, so on and so forth. So when you have a fully developed XR metaverse, literally everything everywhere is connected in some fashion or another. And this includes a lot of moving pieces. It's data visualization, it's digital overlays, it's the Internet of Things with embedded sensors everywhere, smart buildings that respond to you when you walk up to them and know who you are, know why you're there. It's Skynet, it's spatial computing, it's 5G. And the list just goes on and on. And one of the important parts here, and I'll be addressing this in a little bit, is the concept of a digital twin. And when you take all these technologies together and you build out what we call the XR metaverse, or our platform, Omniscape, it's startling in that it has an impact or an effect or a use case in pretty much every industry sector you can think of, whether it's entertainment or education, medical, communications. I mean, it's straight across the board. And these things it's very easy to get lost in the weeds in terms of the full potential here. So we always try to boil it down and distill it into what are the basic core components we need? What are the fundamentals here that we can build from that give us the maximum amount of leverage, where anybody else can use the system and build out things and develop it and really reach out to pretty much all these other industry verticals. So next awesome slide, please. Here we go. So the world on chain, and if you're a fan of The Mandalorian, you'll understand that BSV is the way. So when we think about all these amazing things that are possible with AR and VR, and even more so when you combine them together into the seamless sort of model, you have to. There's these underlying things that are very important. It's authenticity, it's commerce, it's being able to understand where things came from, being able to kind of trust the data. If I'm out there with a pair of wearable displays, I'm seeing cool holograms everywhere and a lot of data popping up, whether I'm at the mall or I'm having a fun experience somewhere, or maybe I'm working on an oil rig somewhere, and I need data that I can trust. We have to be able to verify where things came from, that it's true, that it's real, that it's authentic. I need to know, where it originated from. I need to know who had it last, who edited it, and I need to be able to also take ownership of things. And without Bitcoin SV and the BSV model, those things aren't there. These are the kind of the missing pieces or the missing link to really develop out the metaverse of the future. Because without these, you can't trust what you see. You can't trust, what you're interacting with. And then, of course, one of the biggest pieces here is scalability. It's probably the most critical thing for developing out these systems of the future that are going to govern every bit and aspect of our lives with data and media and interactivity. You have to have scalability and speed. And quite frankly, Bitcoin SV is the way. There are no other alternatives. So, okay, and moving on to the next killer slide that I probably spent hours developing, or maybe not so much. So we're going to talk about Omniscape, which is our platform. It's an XR platform. Early on, we're really focusing on a couple of these underlying pieces that we think are going to be important, now and later, in terms of taking this amazing technology and making it accessible right now, today, and not in 10 or 20 years. One of the big pieces here is monetization. If we can't monetize it, then it's usually a lot of just, fun novelty stuff. But if we can build in monetization and we can make it where it has a viable, valuable use case for businesses and brands and consumers, connecting everybody together, driving commerce, driving interactions, and driving real data and real value, then we have a nice fundamental piece that we can kind of build on and grow. And then that then becomes the core or a cornerstone for what we all envision as, Ready Player One's The Oasis. All the cool stuff you see with, whether it's training or education or exciting game worlds or whatever, if you can monetize that, that's great for brands. It's great for advertisers. It's great for businesses, facilitates commerce. And it also makes it easy for the regular guy in the street to be a content creator and monetize their work. And really, benefit and gain value from using the system, whereas they may not be able to, do that otherwise. So then, of course, down at the very bottom, actually, we can move on. Next slide, please. This is so getting into virtual goods. This is one of the ways that we monetize things. The idea here, and this is new, and kind of one of the first times we're actually talking about this in public. We're basically linking 3D objects and content, whether it's a nice little 3D, Domino's pizza, or it's a super intelligent, artificially intelligent driven hologram that's talking to you on the street or acting as a customer service representative or a game character, or kind of a life hologram version of Amazon's Alexa or Siri talking to you in your living room. We're taking these things and we're linking them to real world products and special offers and other services. So if you're familiar with Pokemon or Pokemon Go, this is kind of a good example. You can imagine you're walking down the street. There's my 3D Starbucks coffee cup in augmented reality. I can pull out my phone, I tap it, and yay, I've got a 3D Starbucks coffee cup. But what's important is that this is a unique item. It's on-chain. It's verified in terms of where its origin is and where it came from. And it's actually redeemable for a real cup of coffee at a nearby Starbucks. This is, this is pretty amazing. But not only that, but it's transferable. And this is huge. Being able to have that thing that's linked to real world data as real value that I can give to somebody else or transfer along, and also track where it came from, where it was discovered, who found it, who had it, so on and so forth. That very first impression, all the way through to that point where it's actually redeemed for a transaction, this becomes amazing. We can prove and validate the return on investment for an ad spend. We can make sure that there's no fraud, there's no cheating, you can't copy or duplicate objects, and we can pretty much link these 3D things to any kind of value that we want. Next slide, please. Okay. And so as part of this, I mentioned earlier location. Location is very critical. It basically it provides context and relevance for who you are, where you are, what you're doing, and why you're there. When you think about a lot of other AR or VR sort of experiences that are out there, they tend to be a little more novelty driven. It's, scan and see. I'm going to point my phone at a label. I get a fun little experience, and that's kind of it. But in this case, if we add location to the mix and start understanding things, it's actually a bit of a game changer. This idea of ground up as opposed to cloud down makes it a lot easier for us to provide way more detail and information. So one of the things that we're doing here with Omniscape, we let you go to a location. You can add buildings to the world map, or put any other content you want on there, and then we can link that to a VR space that's experienceable in either a browser or through a client. And what's really interesting here is this is different from going to somewhere else like Second Life. This is basically a 3D environment that's linked to your location. I'm getting some audio bleed over. Hang on, I can't hear. I'm sorry. 1 second. Getting audio bleed over, please. Sorry about that. So I'm sorry, to pick up again. So we're basically linking virtual environments to locations, kind of this idea of a digital twin, which is basically a one-to-one scale 3D copy of the world that you're at. So for example, I'm here in my awesome office. There's a 3D model of it that you can experience remotely with virtual reality and walk around and have an avatar. But because those environments are identical, we know where your avatar is in the virtual reality space. We can now draw a hologram in the augmented reality space, and vice versa. There should be a hologram of me in the same place, position, and orientation in the virtual reality side. And this opens up entirely new ways for interacting with people, obviously with content and data, and other interactions. If I turn on a light in VR, it should turn on a light in the real world space, and again, vice versa. And we take all of this and link it right back to a map. So you can go through the map, click on a paste and discover it, and there you go. And this has really tremendous implications for things like sports stadiums, office buildings, colleges, universities, businesses, and retail. It changes the way that we interact with both the world around us and with the virtual environment, kind of at the same time. And again, this gets back to the idea of a blend between the virtual and the augmented together as XR as opposed to just VR. Next slide, please. So here's a couple of examples of some pretty fantastic 3D environments. And what's really interesting is it doesn't always have to be a digital twin. It could very well be a full-on, customized fantasy environment, or it could be, accurate down to centimeters, built from architectural plans and, building information modeling, or the layout of your oil rig somewhere. And then when you take all of the other elements and aspects of kind of this whole metaverse, XR metaverse concept, we can start pulling in data from sensors, data from mobile phones, data from devices, and then use that to populate and drive real-time data visualizations, both in augmented reality and in the virtual reality space together. And that's that crazy, amazing combination. But to do that well, you have to have it on chain, because you need to be able to trust that data, and it has to be scalable, and it has to facilitate commerce and communication, as well as protect identity and security. And these are the fundamental pieces that are necessary to make all of the amazing, cool technology pieces, come to life. Next slide, please. So one of the really interesting things that we're doing, and this ties back into some of the commerce and how we want to open things up to the world. We're basically going to be treating location like domain names and giving people the ability to go in, claim a location, little hexagon, pay $1, $2, or whatever. And you basically have control and ownership over that location for like 2 years, and then you'll pay a small renewal fee. What's amazing though is, again, we treat it like a domain name, so you can turn around and sell it to somebody else for whatever you want, or you can kind of hang on to it. But anytime a brand comes in and says, hey, this is amazing, we're going to do this huge experience here, we're going to throw down 3D Starbucks coffee cups and Nike shoes and wherever, all over the place. When a brand or an advertiser or a content creator comes in and does a paid content placement whoever owns that location is going to get a revenue share from us, and we can pay that in BSV, which is super awesome, or some other sort of method. So this basically kind of democratizes the idea of ownership of a location and lets people, have a sense of ownership, have a sense of participation, and it creates a way for people to make additional money by grabbing these locations, whether you're a business and you want to control your digital airspace, or maybe you're a young web developer and you want to go and grab your local mall and then provide services to all of the businesses there to help them manage their digital twin space, or to kind of attract other advertisers and paid content, whatever. It's a really nice, it's like a three-way ecosystem that helps monetize things for the businesses, the brands, and the consumers together. And then, of course, there's some other really interesting things that we have here. One of the big problems with the idea of the XR metaverse or whatever is spam or too much content. Nobody wants to see crazy 3D flying pelicans all over the place. So we have some really interesting models built in for content curation and some other things that, again, feed into this overall system to drive monetization. It'll be on chain and basically ensures that you're only going to see the content that you want and you need to see at any given time. And it's going to be useful and relevant and contextual. And of course, on chain, and everybody is going to have a nice piece of the pie in terms of the monetization pieces. Next slide, please. So we're talking about a lot of cool future technology, and some of this we've heard about for years. I got my start probably 1992, very early on in VR, and been heavily influenced by all the really cool stuff, Neuromancer and Tron and Ready Player One and Snow Crash. I mean, all the cool stuff. And it's always been 10, 20, 30 years out, like, oh, when's it going to get here? I'm tired of waiting for the flying cars. But a lot of the technology pieces are here. They're today. It's futuristic, but it's available today. And we're beginning to put all of these pieces together. And now suddenly, we have BSV as kind of that missing component that suddenly makes it feasible and viable to build these amazing things today with this future technology that will give us a better tomorrow. And tomorrow is not 10 or 20 years out. It's months out. It's maybe a year for maybe the cool, glasses or whatever. But all the pieces are there. We're doing it now. We're going to be actually rolling out a lot of this in the next, 6-9 months, a little bit early. Some of the projects we're working on involve some really big Fortune 100 companies, telecoms, some really large venues. We've been in stealth for a while, but we have an amazing team of developers and biz dev guys that have been, working like crazy, laying the foundation and groundwork for a lot of amazing stuff. And I'm really excited to be here at CoinGeek to kind of talk about some of this stuff and really begin sharing it. But it's happening. It's coming very soon. We're extraordinarily excited about it. And this is the perfect event and the perfect time to be talking about it. To it, if we can go to the next slide, we actually have some other fun stuff here. So two things. First, we're going to be giving away an awesome and rare and super hard to find 128 gig Oculus Quest. All you have to do is download the CoinGeek augmented reality and voting app, which we can provide some information on to get you sorted out with. And that's it. Download the app, register with a valid email, and we'll enter you into the drawing. But what's really cool about this app, you're going to have the opportunity to vote on the hackathons, as well as at the end of the day, there's going to be some trivia questions about each of the presenters. And there'll be some prizes there for the right answers. And then once a day, we're going to do some really insane thing here. We're going to basically, we're going to turn on an augmented reality feature in the app. We're going to spawn 3D logos of all the gold sponsors, and each one of those logos is directly tied to a small amount of BSV. So turn on your phone and grab them. They're going to be in the room around you, and it'll be immediately deposited into your BSV wallet, which you do need to link when you first start the app, and you'll be able to see it on chain. It's right there, transaction. It's live and it's happening, and this is going to be the first time ever anywhere a 3D object in augmented reality is actually worth real money, real BSV, and you'll be able to see that deposit directly into your wallet. We're really excited about this. It seems a little simple, but the implications are huge. And this is the beginning of a new dawn of information and data and the world around you. And it's all going to be on chain, and it's going to be on the only chain. It's going to be on blockchain SV, and it's going to be fantastic. I probably had too much coffee, but this is we're really looking forward to what's going to happen in the next year, and also checking out the rest of the amazing stuff at this conference. So I think I'm nearing time. Yep.
Robert, this is Jimmy Nguyen. That is a great presentation. I'm so glad the world finally got to hear about Transmira and Omniscape. I have a few questions for you. You ready? Can I hear?
My audio's out.
Okay. Well, I'm going to hopefully ask Robert some questions if he can hear me. If not, we're going to cut to another break. But one of the things I wanted to point out to people who are watching out there on the virtual conference stream is that the 3D objects that he's talking about in the app that you'll see, which represent BSV, are tokens. So they are a creation of tokens in real live usage on the Bitcoin SV network that Transmira and Omniscape have been working on for some time with our conference team to help illustrate the power of this environment to promote sponsors. And Robert actually will be joining us on the Token Solutions panel tomorrow to talk about his perspective of what is needed for tokens from the token issuer's perspective. Robert, can you hear me now?
I can, loud and clear.
Great. So I have a couple of questions for you while we have some time. One is, well, I just mentioned that the objects are tokens. Tell us a little bit, without spilling too much for tomorrow, about your experience of creating these tokens for your application.
Fun story. It was actually my developers, not me. I'm more of a technologist. But from their perspective, it's been very easy. It was very fast. It was actually surprisingly simple. When we first started looking at this, it seemed was going to be a huge nightmare, headache, or new technology. But no, it was surprisingly easy and very fast. And when we had our first demo, internally, it was pretty mind-blowing and very exciting to kind of see it. And it kind of took us a little bit to look at and go, my God, we actually just built this and it works and it's really fast. This is huge. And I think we were a little dumbfounded at our own work. It's just very exciting.
So these tokens in the conference app represent small amounts of Bitcoin SV, but as I understand it, you can create virtual items that represent other types of tokens and rights, such as coupons, for example, or other things. What other things can be done with these virtual item tokens?
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty much anything. One of the ideas that we looked at when we were building this is, again, part of the idea of value or transferability. So in some cases, obviously we can link money to a 3D object, or an offer or a special offer. So for example, I can find a pair of 3D Nikes, whatever, that I can pick up, collect, and then go to a store and redeem and get that discount and have that all tracked. But at the same time too, I can also take that and transfer it to another mode or environment, whether it's AR or VR, or maybe I found it in Fortnite and I'm kind of pulling it out of that game and going somewhere else. So not only can we do money or special offers, but there's also other types of data or other things that we can kind of add there. And the idea is that things should always be transferable. So maybe it's an AI script or a chat bot or some other type of content. Maybe it's a piece of music, but it should only be, it's unique and it only exists where it's at. So that transferability and that kind of that packaging of things, as a token, I think it's really important to be able to do that.
Yeah, which opens up a lot of opportunities for sponsors to engage with this. Here's a question from one of the online audience members, which is, this is very cool. Digital twins are a massive potential for tokenization standards on a global blockchain. So will this be like a HoloLens type environment powered by Bitcoin? Will this be like a HoloLens type environment powered by Bitcoin?
Yes, but not necessarily limited to that wearable display. Because we want to focus on the fundamental pieces of the data, we're basically abstracting things out from the end user device. So whether it's your phone or a tablet or an Oculus Quest or HoloLens or Nreal or any of the other sort of options, or you know what, in the future, augmented reality contact lenses. That's all going to happen, and it's going to be very cool. But we want to make sure that it's accessible to everybody, regardless of what type of device that you're on. And we basically scale the quality or the density of the 3D stuff. So, yeah, HoloLens is great, but it's not going to be required. There's things that you can do right now with just your mobile device.
All right, I'm going to ask you one quick question as we close out the session, which is how will this be used in a real estate environment to sell land or other physical assets?
So there's two ways there. There's I've seen some things out there about using smart contracts or tokens, whatever, to help or handle real estate deals, in the real world. And I think that that's absolutely going to happen and is certainly doable. From our perspective, because we tend to be focusing more on the AR, VR, XR metaverse sort of thing, we treat the digital side a little bit differently. So we have the digital real estate, and we have kind of like a digital airspace. And those are both, I guess, the virtual or the augmented, the data, the information that's linked to that real world physical location. And then, whether for a new development, that might be in terms of conceptual drawings or virtual reality walkthroughs or whatever, or even for an existing place, you can see how it could look like, what it looked like in the past, what it looked like in the future, or even being able to access data and information about, where the wires are in the wall, or this maintenance panel needs to be checked once a day or whatever. So there's an emerging market there where it's really going to be important to look at the stack or the ecosystem of experiences between the physical actual dirt in the ground, whether you're buying it or building on it or there's something already there, all the way through to the VR digital twin side, which is going to contain so much more data, but it'll be accessible and tied to and linked to that location on chain.
Okay, and in 30 seconds, last question, I promise. Can you tell us some of the types of business partners or sponsors you've been talking to?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's we'll be making some announcements in the next several months, but we've been talking to, there's at least three telecoms in terms of their 5G infrastructure. There's an extraordinary amount of interest in obviously 5G and what do we do with it? And with what we're building, it really ties into the idea of an augmented smart city and spatial computing. So there's those guys. There's several sports venues that are very interested, obviously because of COVID and social distancing. They're looking for ways to do fan engagement and create new experiences. And then obviously in esports, there's some education, and there's a lot of regular brands. Everybody is trying to figure out, how do we engage with users? How do we, change marketing and advertising to this kind of this experiential sort of thing, and have better experiences, better engagement, and help people, connect both with the world around them and with each other in new ways. So, yeah, there's some large brands, game developers, publishers, and of course, like I said, on the telecom side, that's pretty huge.
Fantastic. And you know how I love connecting the world with one global blockchain. So we wish you a ton of luck on Transmira and Omniscape. I hope the audience goes out there and downloads the conference app to participate in this AR experience. Get yourself some Bitcoin SV tokens through the virtual items and support our sponsors and Omniscape. We look forward to hearing more in the future. Thanks, Robert, for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Jimmy. It's been awesome.
All right. Thank you. And now we get to go to a fun part of our conference, which is connecting the world virtually. Our day one sponsor for the event are our friends at Centbee, which is one of the leading Bitcoin SV mobile wallets in the ecosystem, but provides a whole variety of other financial and services to not just South Africa, but a lot of the African continent. We're going to cut live to South Africa and hear from founders of Centbee. There they are, Lorian Gamaroff and Angus Brown, who are going to tell you a little bit about what's going on with Centbee. Hi, guys. Good to see you, and take it from here.
Good to see you too, Jimmy. Hi, Jimmy. Thank you very much, and welcome to CoinGeek Live attendees joining us here, broadcasting live to you from Johannesburg in South Africa. So very glad to have you with us. I'm Angus Brown, and this is Lauren Gamarov. We are the two founders of CentBee, which has been around in the CoinGeek and the Bitcoin world for quite some time. So we're going to spend the next few minutes just having a little bit of a fireside chat, talking about Bitcoin and about CentBee. So glad you could join us. And I think I'll just kick off, Lauren, with just an origin story. Everybody has an origin story. When did you first get into things? When did you first hear about Bitcoin? How did you get your first Bitcoin? Can you maybe just share with us a little bit of that?
Yes, well, I've been a software engineer for a long time, and having been born in Zimbabwe and the experience of a currency collapsing, Bitcoin was always an interesting idea. This idea of sound money. At that time, I never really thought much about money and where it came from. But given the financial crisis that happened there, it sort of woke me up, and to think about these sorts of things. So at the time, I was building, and this was about 10 years ago, building payment electrical systems for smart grids. And one of the big issues that we had were, how do we get Africans who don't have access to bank accounts and traditional payment systems to easily purchase electricity using these prepaid systems that we had. And the two came together. We had this digital currency that wasn't backed or required banking to operate, and which seemed so accessible at the time. This idea of a cheap digital accessible payment system, it just really struck me. And that's at that time when I started looking into actually trying to integrate it into the vending systems that we had.
That's a fantastic story, and there's actually a movie that has been pushed out quite recently, starring our wonderful Lauren here. So look it up on YouTube. It gives a little bit of backstory. It was the early days. I mean, I remember when you first introduced me to the concept of Bitcoin. It was about 4 years ago. We were having some discussions, and I sort of got swept up with this amazing system that is this ledger that is just this coin that just works. I come from a banking background, so I understand payment systems and banking, and to be able to see how you could actually just rewire things properly. I was really excited about that. But that takes me also back to, 2016, 2017, when we formed CentBee. We've been through some journeys. We've been through some challenges. We've went from Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV. Tell me, what is your views on why we went through those decisions at that point?
Yes, the whole idea of Bitcoin, it was always kind of confused with this idea of people wanting to have a financial system that was outside of government control. I think during the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, people who again, like me, weren't that interested in money, but when there was a collapse, people immediately started mistrusting governments in general. And so thinking about Bitcoin not only as a cash system, but also a financial system without control and without manipulation, without central banks being able to come in and manipulate the currency. That obviously swept a lot of people along. And then, of course, there were a lot of those kind of libertarian people who talked about Bitcoin being unconfiscatable and all those sorts of things. So you can see why, especially since Satoshi, kind of left the project and left it to the world to do with it whatever they wanted, why all these ideas kind of crept in. But, we've always had that approach that we wanted this to be a system that was accessible to most people. And of course, we can't create a system that's in isolation. It needs to operate within a commercial environment. There needs to be a whole infrastructure out there of companies who are willing to provide various aspects. For example, the stuff that we do, we integrate into payment service providers, points of sale. And those companies, there are legitimate companies. They have regulatory obligations that they need to fulfill. So if we want to create a Bitcoin as a payment system, we need to operate within that legal regulatory environment. So for us, I mean, we never took that view, although obviously in the early days when I was a little bit more idealistic, quite pleased about Bitcoin being something that didn't have a central planner behind it. But we see that this needs to be commercialized, and even Satoshi Nakamoto mentioned that this is a system that ultimately will become commercialized, and that's the only way it can be sustainable. So this is always been our view, try and create a system that can work with local rules and regulations. And that means, we can now have all the successes that we've had, especially with our onboarding. We've covered Southern Africa with the ability for people to buy, top up their Sendplay wallet with Bitcoin. And now we're doing the payments, the purchases, people being able to spend their Bitcoin.
So during all that time, we built a wallet. I presume everybody out there has a Sendplay wallet, which you can use for collecting your coins as you go along during the course of the conference. So we've got users like the people listening to this call as well. But we also have other sorts of users. Who do you think, tell me about your world of who do you think the actual Sendplay customer is? What do they look like? What do they do? What do they buy? How do they get their Bitcoin?
Yes, so now we've been on that journey, and we're seeing the types of users that are coming on board, and especially now that we've made it possible for Southern African users to purchase things like mobile data, mobile airtime, electricity, and then of course, we're about to open up other digital payments like PlayStation and Xbox and Uber and Netflix. We're starting to see customers who didn't normally make those sorts of purchases on their own, people like teenagers and that, because now they can have a wallet and a digital wallet, and they can now go and purchase these things, and they were typically excluded prior to that. So as we thought, all those years ago, this is going to be a financial application, a financial system that can reach places that typically we never thought about. So we've had a lot of success in getting teenagers, but also the typically unbanked sorts of people here in Southern Africa to look at Sendplay as a really useful thing.
And you're particularly excited about the ability to buy small value things. So being able to buy mobile data with your Bitcoin, what Jimmy's talking to about, data and Bitcoin being together. It's particularly nice that you can buy $1 worth of data with your Bitcoin, and you can buy Bitcoin, you can sell it, you can move it around. It makes it smooth. It makes it a payment system. It makes it easy to use as money, not just as something to hold. So I'm, as a banker, very excited about that, very excited about it. What else do you see us growing into? What's your vision?
Well, the vision is always an interesting one, especially now that people are looking at Bitcoin SV as not just cash. Now that we're thinking about tokenizing and all that. In fact, most of the conversation nowadays seems to be away from the idea of cash. We always looked at the title of the white paper, and that was, that became our mantra, electronic cash. So that's of course where we're most excited. But I want to ask you, given all this interest and excitement and talk around tokenized solutions and data and own your own data, that sort of thing, do you see Bitcoin SV as becoming cash that people want to hold and spend, instead of just being something that you use without even knowing that you're using it?
It's a very good question. I think as a banker who's worked in payment systems for 20 years, I've had a lot of experience